Come on. No, that's old and corny. I appreciate Dr. McKinney and Dr. Smith letting me do this with you today, and I look forward to sharing some things with you and maybe getting some comments back from you. And it's not anything you're going to be held necessarily accountable for, other than I hope it helps you a little bit in to think a little bit about what's going on. First of all, I'm Doug Eury, S-E-U-R-Y. I've been with the School of Ed now 11 years. Been dean for about a year, a little over a year. I've been involved in education for 44 years. I taught 17 years, going back quite a while. I've actually taught in a 6-12 school, which was in middle school, high school combination, and taught middle school social studies, middle school math. I had a double major in math and PE, and then taught high school math and some high school PE. And then for 16 years after that, I was a school administrator. Went through the ranks that normally you do with that, retired 11 years ago, and came to Gardner-Webb. So that's just a background of where I've been. So I've spent a lot of time doing something I'm very passionate about, and I still continue to do that, and probably don't see any time of not ever doing that, because I believe very strongly in education, and especially public education. During those first 17 years, I did coach football, basketball, track, golf, and went through a period of time as a athletic director, so that's all normal for the piece too. So in 44 years, I've probably had thousands of hours of classes, staff development, professional development, training to be a teacher, and that type of thing. But out of all of that, the most significant thing that has ever happened to me was a program called TESSA. That stands for Teacher Expectations and Student Achievement. I was exposed to it, you see how old this notebook is, I was exposed to it in 1983. So that's been a while. And I still say it's the best thing that has ever happened to me in terms of looking at myself as leading learning for groups of people, whether it be church, Sunday school class, or a classroom, or this kind of work, or graduate work, whatever that case might be. This has had a bigger impact than anything I've ever done. So that's why I wanted to share it with you. Because I think, not that it'll have that kind of impact on you necessarily, but if you can take a little bit out of it at all and think about it, I think it might be a benefit to you. The best aspect of that is being able to experience the whole training module, and it takes a whole semester to do it. So we're going to do it in 75 minutes, which you might do in 6 months. Therefore, it won't have the same impact on you. Now, beyond that, then there might be some other opportunities when you get a teaching job or that type of thing. When I got my first principalship after teaching for 17 years, and then I went as assistant principal, then when I first got my principal's job, the first thing I did in the school for the first year was to go through an effective school training. And the reason I did that is because effective school is a common language. There are certain things that effective schools have in them: instructional leadership, instructional focus, a good climate, safety, data-driven piece. I can't even name all 8 of them now, but the reason I did that with the school that I became principal of is if you and I both have studied effective schools, we can talk all day long in the language of that. My second year, I exposed my staff to this training that I'm going to share with you today, because I thought that was the next natural move for that. Not that you're thinking about what you might do as a principal. I'm just trying to show the importance of how I feel about what this does for people. And I've done this most recently with 2 middle schools in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, and we went through with the faculty. I'm actually sharing notes with you that I use to talk to these faculties with, so some of these slides we'll have to sort of skip over or explain because I used them before, that kind of thing. So here's the premise, that we as adults teach people what they're capable of doing by our actions and our behaviors or our words. I went into a middle school down east about 6 years ago to talk about classroom discipline. And when I walked in, one of the teachers says, "Oh, here's the person going to give us some tricks and some keys to how to handle middle school discipline." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm going to talk to you about you." And we went through this same understanding here. This changes the concept a little bit. Not that the other's not important. Classroom management skills are definitely important. The concept here is we reduce the need for those classroom management skills based on the way we behave as the adult in charge of the learning piece. So in 1983, my principal signed us up for this training and came in and gave this overview, and I said to myself, well, they're talking about all these other people. I'm a good teacher. This is not going to pertain to me, but I got to be here, so I'll sit through that too. I learned very quickly that I was violating some of those principles that are brought forth in the concept of a self-fulfilling prophecy, a lot more than I thought I had, but it helped me pinpoint that. So the concept here is we help people think about themselves, what they're capable of doing. I'm sure you've studied expectations somewhere along the line. There's a level of expectation, obviously. These are about the things we do on a daily basis that help people formulate in their own mind what they're capable of doing by just the way we act. And that we can change that perception of themselves with some habits that are more productive than the ones we have. Now you're already saying it's not you, it's the rest of them in here. I've been there, I know that feeling. And there's some truth to that. Some of the things we might say aren't necessarily different from you. But now, 30 years later, 28 years later, 29 years later, when I teach a graduate class, these same principles still pop up in my mind. And I get very frustrated if I'm limited to practicing the habits or the behaviors that this program taught me. And I think it makes a difference in the response of those people around me. So that's sort of the background of this. And we're going, as I said, we're going to do it very quickly. 6 months and about 75 minutes. Now we're down to about 70 minutes. So we can't do it. I hope you want to know more about it. I'll be glad to spend some time with you, and I know your instructors will be glad to spend some time with you. I was just fortunate to work for a principal that volunteered us for everything that came along. He volunteered us to do effective schools before there was effective schools. We were a pilot. Then he volunteered us to do TESA, and as hard as it was at the time to find time to get involved with that, I go back, I still see him occasionally. He's about 84 years old now. I still see him occasionally and thank him for that opportunity. Well, that's enough of a sales pitch. What is this? If this is all that magical, what is it? It's about changing what we do in the classroom. Let me tell you about TESA. If you were in the training module, this is the way it was done with us as teachers. We divided in, we listened to someone like me talk about the theoretical principles behind our behaviors, and then we divided into groups of 4, and we were in a high school, or 6-12, so I was teaching high school math and PE by that time. The groups of 4 were like non-common planning periods, so my planning period was like the last period, so I had to be with 3 other people who didn't have last period open, but they had another period. So I had a French teacher, a senior English teacher, auto mechanics teacher, and myself. We all had different planning periods. And what we did was go in and observe each other with a coding sheet that coded our behaviors, and then that sheet was handed to us for reflective purposes. So we'd have a meeting after school, a couple hours, go over some theoretical pieces, then have 3 or 4 or 5 weeks for somebody to come in and at least 3 times and observe you, and you gave them a seating chart, and when you practice these behaviors, that I'm going to share with you. They put a check in the seating chart, and then they hand you the seating chart. And there was no grade to it. It was just to give me reflection based on what I knew. And these are the things that we were measuring. It started with response opportunities. And we'll talk a lot about equity in this, and equity in terms of opportunity, not necessarily equity in terms of resource or programs or that type thing. Equitable distribution response opportunity, the theory behind that is, there's two pieces. One, if we allow learners to sit where they want to, and we don't do that much with seating charts, but if you did, the high achievers would sit on the front or the middle. Low achievers sit in the back corners. If you go to a meeting today, and I've been in meetings where I knew some of the people, or when I used to have meetings with my staff, my coaches would always sit in the back corners because those are people who tune themselves out. So we really don't know what people think about their ability to learn. Don't have a seating chart and just see where they end up at church or wherever, in any kind of setting. And that doesn't hold true for everybody because there's always exceptions, but that's what research has taught us. We as teachers, because of that, will teach in the front of the classroom, and we might walk down the middle. Or we're going to teach to the way they think they can learn. It's just human nature. It's not because we're bad people, it's we get conditioned that way. So obviously, when we do that, even if we get out of position here of what we have been trained to do because of learning, that's because these people answer all the questions. If you get in a conversation, they carry on the conversation. There are exceptions to the rules, so don't say, well, I've sat over there before and been involved. That happens. The first theory is you should give equitable distribution of response opportunities. So I've got to make sure, now I'm being observed by a French teacher, or an English teacher, and auto mechanic. I got to make sure that when I get my seating chart back, I have an equal number of checks in every box. The first time I did it, it astounded me. Where were all my checks? And I was a roving teacher, so seating charts, and I was going in somebody else's room, so I didn't deal with seating charts unless we had a discipline problem. So when I got my first coding sheet back, all my questions were along the front and down the middle, predominantly. I had distributed the behavior that they told me I was going to. How do you change that? Be aware. Be aware of that. Second time, I got another teacher coming in, and I'm teaching this math class. I got a young man back here in this far quadrant, which his name was Rodney Harkey. Rodney and I are still good friends. He's a mechanic in my hometown, and I tell him I use his name, and he just laughs about it. Very successful. Rodney sat in that back corner, and he always put his head down on his hand. He went to sleep. When he left the class, he had a red circle on his forehead. We called it Red Circle Rodney because he slept. We let him sleep because if Rodney was awake, nobody else learned anything. Now, I've been through TESA training on equitable distribution of questions, and my French teacher, who's more academic than I am, at least in her mind, I'm not going to look bad. So I say, what is 4 plus 4? I'm making that up. And then I pause 5 seconds. Anybody know why you do that? It's called latency. You should always wait. You don't say, Rodney, what is 4 plus 4? You say, what is 4 plus 4? Wait 5 seconds and ask Rodney. Well, Rodney looked up and says, why did you call on me? You never have before. So when we went back the next week, or the next couple of weeks for our next session, my Rodney story drove home the point of what this was all about. Rodney knew I wasn't going to call on him because why? The way I behaved. So we got him in and we got Rodney moving. That whole theory about the question first, if you ask the question first and then wait to call somebody's name, who answers the question? Everybody. If I ask a question and you don't know who's going to call on you or your neighbor, you're going to start formulating an answer because you want to have the answer. If I say, Rodney, what is, the other 29 people will shut down. We go back a ways. I'm sure Dr. McKinney remembers Madeline Hunter. Madeline Hunter taught us, ask the question first, wait 5 seconds, then start calling somebody. Therefore, you're not only asking one question of one person, you're asking one question of everybody in the room. Answer might not be, you might, when you formulate it, it might be right, but you get a chance to correct that too. So the first thing was, in the response, there's some major strands here. One is response opportunities. Applied to that, or closely connected to that, is provide individual help or assistance. What we do subconsciously through our habits and behaviors, if you call on someone and they can't answer the questions, and we know that they've never answered a question, we very quickly go to somebody else. And we'll do that especially if somebody's in the class watching us, because we want to hear the right answer. That way the person who's looking at us teach thinks we're a better teacher because somebody knew the answer. What this theory says is we should not allow that to be the reason we move on. We should provide help to that individual, whether it be hints or additional information. Sometimes you can ask the student next to them to help provide some information. But give that individual help or assistance. Students who are slow learners or low learners or had trouble learning don't even expect help, because they've what? Most cases never gotten it. Again, there are exceptions to the rule. We're turning out better teachers than we did 30 years ago. So some of this comes along the same trends of what you've been trained to do. My point in all of this is to be aware of that, and not let the person who hasn't demonstrated to you that they can learn or have learned, not let them drive what you do by leaving them out. That's still an equity issue. Allow times for response. When you call on somebody, you read a question, then you wait 5 seconds, then you call on Rodney, you wait and let Rodney answer. Normally, what would you do? Before I had this training, when I called on Rodney and he didn't say A immediately, then I'd leave him. Not only did I not give him help, I rushed away from him, especially with that French teacher in there. I want her to know that I've taught this group how to add 4 plus 4. And it was a quadratic equation. It wasn't just something simple. But we run away from that, and then we don't allow time. Then we delve, rephrase, or give clues, because we want them to have an opportunity to contribute, an opportunity to learn from that. We drive that expectation based on the level of questions, the number of times we call on them, and how long we give them to give that answer. And you feel like maybe you aren't doing your job when you get spending a lot of time waiting and listening, but there are learning opportunities for the rest of the class. Pace is important. You don't want to get into where you just, especially if you've got a discipline group that's hard to discipline, then you have to stay on pace and address some of that. But our point behind this is, this changes some of those behaviors that are given to you. Use higher level questioning, calls for student opinion, explanation, and evaluation. What you ask someone determines what you tell them you think they're capable of doing. I used this example last week with doctoral students. If I walk to this young lady and say, "Can you tell me who discovered America?" and she answered or didn't answer, I'm going to take time and slow down and delve and that kind of thing. And then I walk over here and say, "Can you tell me the conditions in Europe in 1492 that led to the discovery of the New World?" I've just told this young lady that she's not smart enough to answer a higher level question. Not directly, but subconsciously, her mind has factored in the fact that I don't expect her to be able to think. So your questions could be more like, can you tell me who discovered America, and can you also relate to the issues in Europe at that time? She may not answer. So then what I do? I'm going to wait a little bit. Allow time for that response. And then what? I got to start delving. I'll say, "Well, maybe this will help you a little bit. You know, we talk about kings and queens and having power over other countries and blah. Does that eventually you want her to talk about resource in the new world and allowed countries to grow powerful and have resources and those kind of things." So you begin to you begin to help them come up with that. Now, there's a point at which you can turn and ask someone to give help. You don't want to stay there forever. But there's a difference between the level of question, the time it takes there, the delving into it, and then the next phase kicks in, which is feedback. And feedback, I no doubt in my mind, you've been taught how to use feedback. And I was, as an administrator, I've observed thousands and thousands of lessons. Feedback was never really a big issue. The problem was, it wasn't very specific every time. We tend to get caught up in, that's good, that's a good answer, that's right, that's okay, that's the way to go. We get very stuck on those kinds of things. What this principle behind TESA teaches, make sure that we affirm and correct student performance and give them a reason for praising them. She tells me about the conditions in Europe that led to the discovery of the New World. I said, that's an outstanding answer. That's a good analysis. That demonstrates that you understand economic conditions and expansion of the world and discovery of new things. There's reasons to reinforce that kind of answer instead of saying, that's a good answer. Great, wonderful. You use those, don't overuse them. Give the real reason why that answer is wonderful. And see, I got this French teacher, an English teacher, and auto mechanics teacher. They're coding every time. The first time they come in, they're just coding my questions. The next time they come in, they're coding whether or not I'm asking higher level questions. Then they're coming in and coding if I give good feedback to students. So when I give what they consider good feedback, it's a check. So what am I looking for? Equal number of checks. You never get away from that equitable distribution of the opportunity, whether it be the original question or whether it is the follow-up feedback to that particular question. Now, I know you don't want people in your room coding you all the time. This is a habit. What did it do? When I reflected on these seating charts at my performance, it told me a couple of things. I need to distribute my questions more equally. I need more higher level questions, and I need to have reasons for feedback and be specific with it. So when I planned for the next day, I changed the way I behaved. I wasn't changing a thing about the students except getting more out of the students that I dealt with or was in charge with. It changed me. I know content's important, skill's important, whatever you teach, whether it be a grade level or a subject level, all that's important. But what I'm saying in this, it's also important for you to think about you as a teacher in terms of how you can improve the quality of what those students learn based on this. Listen attentively. We normally don't do that with low achievers. We want to get away from it. We didn't even let Rodney wake up. We let him sleep. We did him the biggest disservice that anybody could do. He made it. He had a skill. He loved cars. And that was his way out to do. But there's others we do disservice to based on the way we behave. And I'm guilty of not giving to every student, at least prior to this time, the first 12 years I taught, I didn't practice these behaviors. And I still don't do the best job with it, but I continually think about it. If you think about it and relate to it, then you begin to change some of that. Accept and reflect students' feelings in a non-evaluative manner. So, believe it or not, I've been in classes where a teacher would say, well, that was stupid, that's a stupid response, or frown, or do something with your nose, or squint. Some of that's habit too, some of that's personality. But if we do that, then we're reinforcing that you can't learn. I had a basketball coach in one school who was great, had a good teacher. He won a state championship, he had great success, he had kids go to college. And he taught well in the classroom, taught U.S. history. But he was the world's worst at calling someone dumb, stupid, or you ignorant. He thought he was funny. And he wasn't a bad person. He thought it was a relationship builder to talk on that level with a student. So we had, when I took that staff through Tessa, so I was principal of 5 different schools, and every one of them got a 6 months dose of this. That's how firm I believe in it. Once we went through this, then I could say, Bob, you know, I know you think that helps you within this situation, but it really subconsciously, that those kids that you talk to like that begin to believe that. That's in a way that reflects something. Now, that's a special case, but this is more about just our facial expression and our shoulder expressions and the way we act. Did you know that when you do things with your chin, that you impact what people think about themselves? If I raise my chin above level space, I'm telling you I know more than you, I'm arrogant. And if I lower my chin, I'm telling you that you might be a little smarter than me, but I don't care. Yeah, and that's another subject for another time, but the way we hold our shoulders and our eyes and our chin has a lot to do with the way people perceive us. We teach other people how to treat us, and we teach other people what we think they're capable of doing. So there's a lot of practice in creating those kinds of habits. I got to come back to you sometime, do a difficult people piece and talk about how to manage difficult people. We try to manage difficult people by making them do what we want them to do. You manage difficult people by getting them to understand how you want them to treat you. And you do it with your body, you do it with your language, you do it with your tone. And that's helpful too. I might be worth coming back with you and show you some things on that. But now that's along the same theoretical concept of reflecting. This one, it probably motivates me more now. I am frustrated to no end right now. Right now I have a high degree of frustration. Tessa told me I need to move within arm's distance of every student. How often? It didn't matter how often, as long as it's equal. So when they code me in that little seating chart, every time I came within arm's distance of a student, I got a check mark. So when I got my sheet back, and I hadn't been over here very much, what have I taught her? That she can't learn. She's not capable of learning. Now, not outwardly, she may not even be able to tell you that. Where's my frustration? I can't get close to you, I can't get close to you, I can't get close to you, I can't get close to the rest of them. It was so ingrained in me then and still now that when I teach a class that's not organized in a way that allows me to get within arm's distance, I feel like I failed. What does it do? Well, it feels different for one thing, right? When I'm standing beside of you talking, it's a whole lot different than me standing in the front of the room. I had a history teacher one in a school that was one of the best teachers I've ever had. He taught AP history. Never got out of his seat. I called him in for the first time I observed him. I said, Robert, you're a great teacher. Your success in the AP test show it. But if you get up and walk around the room, you're going to set the world on fire. So not every situation calls for you to walk around the room. I mean, we got technology, we got overheads, we got things we do. But when you've got an opportunity to teach, you should be moving about the room. It makes you feel differently about who you are. There's no magic to that other than that you feel it, I would think, as I walk around the room right now. And it's hard for you to sleep if I'm getting within arm's distance of you every time, because it's the sound itself. Expresses courtesy. That's my Bob who want to call everybody dumb and stupid and wasn't very courteous. Courteous is being open and honest and being polite to everyone. To how many? All of them. Can you code that? Certainly. You say things like, I like your top. It's a pretty color for you. It fits well with your skin tone. Or, I saw your basketball game the other night, and I really liked your hustle. Or I saw your band concert. You find things to be courteous about and express that courtesy, and yet you begin to feel like, I'm welcome here, I'm a part of this, this person really believes I'm capable. You probably don't formulate those thoughts, but it's proven subconsciously to do that. That's the same thing with the personal interest. That was hard to do. When you got 30 kids coming into a room, it's not your room to start with, to be able to find something to say, because if you set it to 5 and didn't say it to the other, say something to the other 25, what did my coding sheet look like? Wasn't very attractive. Now those coding sheets, even if they showed something that wasn't positive, if you had an explanation for it, I always had an explanation. I can't spend time giving out 30 compliments and still teach math. But you find a way, especially if you're doing group work kinds of things. And what does that make you have to do outside of your class? You got to get to know your students and what they actually do. And you have to go to things and see them participate. Be involved with them. The next one is changed in 30 years. Touches student in a friendly manner. I wouldn't do that now, but the way society has changed in litigation. But here's my advice. At some point, get eye level with the students. Get down. If you're going to talk about this problem on this sheet of paper, don't do it from a stand-up position. Get down to eye level. To me, eye level is the same thing as touching. We're touching through our minds. It makes a huge difference. Me standing up here talking to you, and then when I get right here, we've connected. No proposal, just a connection. Is that hard to do? Very easy to do. Why don't we do it? We're not in the habit of doing it. That's not the way we were taught to teach. I was never taught to teach that way. I was always taught to stand up in front of the room and deliver what I know. Not to get around the room and come within arm's distance and get down eye level with someone. Why? We're learning together. If I'm above you, you begin to think that I stay above you, and I shouldn't. I'm leading you to learn. We're learning together. If I'm touching you that way, then we are learning together. So that, even though that says that, I don't think we can take that away. That worked well. And when we did these 2 middle schools, you'll probably see some of these slides in a minute. We divided them up in teams, just like I did 30 years ago. I'd go 1 week and we'd talk about something, go back 2 weeks, we'd talk about what happened. How did it change the learning environment that you're entrusted with? And we shared. And we're all positive. It didn't work. It's not going to make a perfect classroom. But the more you do it, the more it becomes part of who you are, the more impact you can have with it. First time you got on a bicycle, you probably failed. First time you practice these behaviors, you're probably going to struggle with it a little bit. I did. I had to make myself ask Rodney a question. But I knew he was going to make a fool out of me, just short as the world. And once I got him awake, I didn't know what, I ended up having to take him to the office, or we were paddling back then. I probably would have paddled it. We don't paddle anymore, do we? I don't believe in paddling. I'm trying to be funny. So, don't give up on it. And regardless of what you think about me and what I'm saying, try it. I had to try it. If I didn't, I was in violation of what the principal asked us to do. You don't have to try it. I would suggest that you do it. I've been in a number of these classes where you'll teach some lessons. And I want to come back. As the dean and as a part of this fine faculty, I want to get in and see more. I wish I could get time to do more of that. But it does bother me when I go into one of these classes and somebody does a mock lesson and they do a PowerPoint and give a pop test. We tend to teach the way we were taught. If we had pop tests when we went through school, we think we're going to still give pop tests. Pop tests don't serve a whole lot of purpose, unless you want to check for how well you might have taught something, not to give a student a grade necessarily. That's my personal opinion. If I'm going to give a pop test is to see if I got through to you the concept that you should have learned. But that's normal, that's natural. When I went through teacher ed at Appalachian State, I did the same thing. I taught a mock lesson, and we didn't have PowerPoints back then. We did overheads or flip charts, and then gave a pop test. But that's not giving you opportunities to have discussions and lead learning and do some things for people that help them get beyond that point. I was really lucky, I'll share this with you. My dad worked in a cotton mill, and they had these things called runners that has something to do with the way the thread runs through the machines when they refine it. And they were all different colors, red, green, blue, purple. And we drew, in my health methods class, we drew topics out of a box, and I got DNA. I thought, oh Lord, I don't even understand DNA. How am I going to teach a lesson on DNA? So I was telling my daddy about it. And he says, well, what's it look like? Well, now my daddy couldn't read and write. And so you couldn't say, go read about DNA and we'll talk about it. I had to explain to him. I said, it's like a staircase, and it has all different color steps. And depending on the order of the color of the steps, it has some indication of what characteristic you have as a human being or as an animal. DNA drives who we are. He said, well, I got all these colored runners, so let's take some straws, we'll cut little holes in them and twist them and put these little colored runners in there, and you'll have a model. It's the highest grade I ever made in undergraduate school, because this teacher just went bananas. Kept my model too, because she wanted to use it the next year. I stumbled onto that. My dad, who couldn't read and write, stumbled onto it, or I was able, or explained it. But at least it got me in, at least that one model lesson I got out of DNA is. Here's a definition of DNA. Here's a picture of some DNA. Here's what DNA does for us. All right, now get out your paper and pencil. What is DNA? That's how I was taught, and that's how I was doing things. That one lesson with DNA taught me a lot about, you know, I got a lot of good eye contact that day. People in college that I was teaching actually got something out of that. And the whole idea is what? For me to create a lesson, and I taught somebody something in a lesson. We'll see more of that. And I know I feel very confident with your instructors that some of those things are happening and some of that moves. I'd like to see more of this. Some of that's personal and some of it's driven by research that it works. So I believe in it. Correct student behavior in a calm, courteous manner. Sometimes I'm good at that, sometimes I wasn't. I know I get too excited sometimes. When I was principal of a rural school, I found that I could slam my fist on my desk and say, by golly, y'all shouldn't be doing that. Those people would respond to it. I went to an urban school, tried that the first time, and I almost got killed. I mean, personalities and characteristics, and there's a cultural kind of thing there. I learned it's a whole lot easier to deal with things. You don't win arguments with emotion, you win arguments with facts and rightness. We tend to want to win by who's the loudest, and who's the longest, and who can shout the most. It doesn't work. And so even in a classroom situation, we don't win those battles. It took me a long time to learn that, almost 20 years. Why? My experience had not been well before. I'd been in a situation where I got by with some things I probably shouldn't have gotten by with. I didn't hurt anybody, it's just it wasn't the right, it wasn't respectful. What are we talking about? We're talking about creating a learning culture that will sustain itself. That comes through interactions, which means that's part of that eye contact, that's part of that proximity, that builds a relationship between you and me if it's nothing more than subconscious. That learning culture is built on routines. Now, if I come in here today and walk all around the classroom and get down on my knees eye to eye, and I come back here tomorrow and I stand here and say, look at this and let me tell you about it, what happens? My routine has not supported that learning culture. So there's a consistency of who you are and what you are. And all of us will take a little different flavor with all this. I'm just showing you what it meant to me and how I responded to it. Obviously, when I went into French teacher, English teacher, and auto mechanics, it's a little bit different. I also taught some PE at the same time, and some of those classes were observed. Typically PE is unfortunately, PE a lot of time is roll out the ball and let's play basketball and play volleyball. And that bothers me too, but that's another lesson, another day. I taught aerobics, I taught skills and volleyball and that. So when I taught aerobics, I'm teaching all boys. That was fun in itself. Bunch of uncoordinated guys doing aerobics. And we did dance routine and that kind of thing. So I'm around the room correcting dance or aerobic patterns or body kinetics and all those things. It really enhanced the class. Normally, before I had this, I would put the record on for aerobics or dance class and watch them and that kind of correction. But you put the music on, and then you get around, you get a chance to stop the music, and you get a chance to do teachable moments, and you do that in math class as well. So it helped me be a better PE teacher as well as a math teacher. But the routines are important. I can't turn the record on one day, walk around the room and give individual instruction, and come in the next day and turn it on, stand in front and watch them and see if they do what I tell them to do. We're going to put this dance song on, you do it. And this is the way you do it, and you do it right. I didn't get much out of that. If I looked away, this group of guys over here just stopped because they didn't want to dance to start with. But if I'm walking around, they began to get a value for what the movement was about and how it might be a lifelong kind of skill. Our language. We have to have a language of learning. We know what learning is. We distribute learning. We create our lessons, but we don't talk about learning itself with our learners. It's talking about problem solving, critical thinking. You and the teacher beside of you are talking about problem solving skills, critical thinking skills, and there's a common language. This comes from one of the middle schools I was in, did a thing called, name escapes me, guy was from Boone, actually. Learning Focused Schools. This is a middle school that had a proficiency score of about 28%, which meant 3 out of every 4 kids were not learning. In 2 years, she moved that school from 28 to over 75% proficient with a common language of learning that created a learning culture, which meant they knew what thinking maps were, they knew what hook statements were, how to hook the student at the beginning of the lesson. They knew what learning activities meant. Every teacher knew what each of those things were. It wasn't just what one's coming from Gardner-Webb or one's coming from UNCC. It wasn't a language they had. They had a common language among the staff. It made a big difference for several reasons. One, it made the teaching stronger. Secondly, every student went in every class, the language was the same. Our thinking map for today is this. Our key question today is this. What is our learning objective for today? And they begin to anticipate that. I stopped kids in the halls in this school and said, tell me about key questions. What is your key question? And tell me one you've experienced today. They could tell you that because that language was consistent with building that culture. I think proximity, equitable distribution, and these other things we talked about all be a part of the language. Now, if you get a job teaching, you can't control what somebody brings to the language necessarily. But you can begin to share some of these experiences with each other and talk about that, and practice some of these yourself to the point that you're able to show some success or at least give some examples of success. Another piece is collaboration. This is a form of collaboration as I share something with you that's 30 years old. That's something we still practice. Collaboration between and among teachers is very important in terms of reflective practice. What works, what didn't work, what about eye contact, down on your knees, didn't work, how do you get proximity in, how do you get higher level questioning. When we did this in these 2 middle schools in Charlotte, we actually shared the questions we asked that were a higher level. And I'm sure you do some of that. Are you working with higher level questions as it fits your content or grade level? And are you sharing that with each other? Here's some questions I think might get students to think differently. Here's a list of questions I keep in my content or grade level area that I know will help. Now that list should change, and that collaboration as you collaborate and learn that. That's something, you're coming out practicing your individual skills, and that's important, but it's also important to understand collaborative skills and be open and honest about some of those things, especially from a critical standpoint. Tell me if you think something was not a good question. Tell me if you think a behavior was not a good behavior. I'm open to that. Increasing self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is important in the learning culture as it contributes to the collective ability. If she gets better at teaching, she gets better at teaching, she gets better at teaching, he gets better at teaching, then the organization itself will get better at teaching. It starts with the individual, your ability to be the best you can be at what you are, but it leads to collective efficacy of that group, driven by your disposition to want to be part of that. That builds back in the collaboration piece. It is driven by professional experience. You can substitute names there like professional development. What is a professional experience? It's what you do as a habit or on a daily basis that increases your knowledge or your ability to do your job. It's driven by what you read, what you talk about, what you experience in life. Then you begin to get better at what you do. The structures that are in place that allow you to collaborate are important. You don't always have control over that, but you can break out of the structure. You get a mean, nasty old principal that won't give you common planning times or set up a time to which you can talk to your grade level person. I did it again. You find ways to do that on your own. Good teachers find ways to collaborate. Most principals will help you do that. They'll set up the structures, but if they don't, you find ways to do that. So you're saying something that's important to each other. That's part of that reflective, formative assessment. Unfortunately, for a long time, we've dealt with summative assessments. I finished the course, I finished my chapter, my unit. Now, how did I do? Well, you look at the kid's grade and you say, I did well or I didn't do well based on what the students do. Or we get end of grade scores or end of course scores in high school and we look back and say, how did I do? It's all over now. How did I do? Well, let me look at my scores. That tells me. That's not what reflective formative assessment is about. It's about what happened today that did or didn't work. And when I come back in here tomorrow, what can I change or what can I reinforce and do the same way? And we have to do that continually. Then we have to begin to talk about that with our peers or our friends and begin to examine what they find in themselves that did or did not work. If we wait, we're going to leave somebody behind. If we wait 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, semester, year, somebody's not going to get it. But if you lead a class today, some of them will get it and some of them will get it a little less and some of them won't get it at all. And you have to have a way to determine your role in that today so that you can do something about that tomorrow. One of these schools I was in Charlotte Middle School, EC teacher, every student in her class at the end of the year made level 3 on the EOC. EOG, she's in middle school. They'd never made level 3s before in their life. And I saw 8 or 10 of her lessons, and I spent time with her after school, as I did with several teachers. Why did all those EC kids who'd never made a level 3 make a level 3? Because every afternoon she said, what did I do that worked? What could I do better? We tend as teachers sometimes to want to complain and gripe about how bad our students are, how they misbehave, how they can't learn. Here's a teacher saying, what did I do? What could I do better? they didn't learn, it was my fault. They didn't learn today. I didn't do something right. I've heard teachers say, well, the parents don't help, the parents don't do anything, no parental involvement, the principal doesn't support me. Kids just misbehave, won't pay attention. That's the reason they didn't learn today. It's their fault. I gave it to them, they didn't get it. And they got a teacher says, what did I do? Why didn't it work? What can I do differently? Oh, by the way, I might go, my class didn't work today, here's what I tried. Did yours do any better than that? And if you did, can I use that tomorrow? That's reflective, formative assessment, not waiting till it's all over. My wife does that to me every day. It's just, you know, I'm at fault. I really am. Key for teachers. Now I'm talking to middle school teachers, so this doesn't really apply to you. When they're talking about, if you go in and look at each other, make sure your seating charts are there. Begin to talk to your teachers about learning cultures. Don't change anything, maintain time in the coding board. We're instructing teachers, that really has nothing to do with you. Those people going in, we said, when you go in and code somebody, don't evaluate them, stay in the background, keep your performance, don't interact with the students and be accurate. So these are rules for teachers. I just got you through session 1, I got to speed up. Teachers are usually alert to the need or low achievers to individual help. However, higher achievers and average students are often more aggressive in seeking teacher help and consequently get more than their share of teachers' time for working with individuals. Who said that? These people that put this research together. Comes predominantly from 2 authors named Jerry Brophy and Thomas Good, B-R-O-P-H-Y-G-O-D-E. They wrote a book called Looking in the Classrooms where they recorded this. There's always exceptions to research, but this is not somebody's light came on and they just finally decided this. They saw it. Those of us who went through TESSA's groups and those faculties I had to go through TESSA when I became principal, we found the same thing until we changed the way we behave. This is the theoretical piece behind what I've tried to share with you. The high achievers will latch on to you, some of the middle achievers will latch on to you, and we'll leave our low achievers to fall through the cracks. Not as individuals, but as a whole, what education is doing. Because of what? Not because of them, because of us.